Boy, oh boy, with so much drama in the JBP. Man, so apparently there is controversy with Melyssa Ford of the Joe Budden podcast and her relaunch of her podcast initially intended to premiere on October 1st and is now rebranded as of November 1st launch date called Hot and Bother with Melyssa Ford. Now, this needs some additional explanation. For the freeloaders who aren't Patreon members, you won't know who this person S is. But for your information, S was a guest on the Joe Button podcast Patreon exclusive episode titled 60 Day Rule, initially back in May of 2024. Then, then again was featured on another exclusive pod titled Does This Sound Debonair in July of 2024. Now, Melyssa Ford announced S as her friend initially back then. Basically, S was like she came out to New York to do styling for for Melyssa, and as a guest speaker on the show, she made an immediate splash on the Patreon audience in the comment section because she was a fresh face to the pod. She broke up at sometimes a monotonous guest from Joe Button, who usually brings on B and C list celebrities and occasionally bring in some random birds that work in the nightlife. Now, S, and yes, her first name is a singular letter S, showed that not only does she have beauty, but that she's educated and an independent thinker and has a calm, non pretentious demeanor about herself, as well as she's candid about her own experiences, which some in the Patreon comment section have stated that S had all of the qualities that they expected Melyssa Ford to have when she debuted on the pod as a guest in 2022. And that it was going to be announced that she would join the show as a permanent co host at the beginning of 2023. There was high hopes for Mel. Fast forward to the issue at hand, Mel initially rolled out her announcement of what was to be titled The Menopod on the Joe Button podcast episode 761, in which she wanted to speak on more marinated and seasoned women's issues, or older women, dealing with the struggles of the women's experience going through the varying stages of menopause, and the S as a nutritionalist and another friend was going to be a co-host because the other friend supposedly some type of a specialty in the field of women's health or something like that. Now, something obviously happened within 3 days of the announcement behind the scenes because the very next episode, number 762 of the Joe Button podcast, Melissa said that she may not launch on October 1st and didn't really go into any specifics of why there was any type of delay. Now, right after that, Melissa came back on episode 763, which she had basically a haphazard explanation of a name change and the new debut date of November 1st. And she had a bit of an attitude also when Ice asked her if she would have the same co-host on the new titled show. Mel visibly, she rolled her eyes and kind of grunted a little bit when she was explaining that she would be the only host on the new launch date. Now, this week, Danny from the Stop hosted Spaces on X, formerly known as Twitter, and S popped into Spaces surprisingly and responded to the light slight and tone Mel had about the relaunch. It stated that the name of the pod, Menopod, was her idea and that she basically pitched the idea to Melissa and her other friend, who was the other would-be co-host of the podcast. And S even claimed to own a copyright or trademark or something like that for the title The Menopod. Also, she gave details that she had receipts of the conversation to Mel about the podcast, and that Melissa and S and the other co-hosts Even they had some brief conversation about a contract that was drawn up. She stated something along to the fact that Melyssa had sent her and the other co-host a contract, and S described it as not favorable when it came to any type of payment or ownership of the podcast. Now, someone in the spaces did ask S had she shot any episodes, and S stated that they already had worked on the pod in New York, in the New York tri-state area. Now, someone also asked S did she contribute any funds for the studio time or production of the project, which she said she didn't know who was paying for the podcast, which brings up many unanswered questions about how they were able to do all of that work and didn't get into any specifics on the finalization of rights or anything. The fact that Melyssa had audio and video content that she was ready to roll out on a podcast within 7 days of filming episode 761 of the Joe Budden podcast, and did not have all the paperwork in order behind the scenes with her co-host was kind of troubling to hear. As herself stated in the spaces that when Mel gave them the contract to sign, they had an issue about the payment and the ownership of the pod and how that would work out. Now, according to S, she felt is if Mel was moving hastily to launch the pod and wanted the October 1st date without getting the proper paperwork in order, and that when S and the other female co-hosts wanted to get more clarity on the possible splits in ownership rights of the pod, Mel essentially ghosted her and the other would-be co-hosts. Then S stated that next thing she hears is Mel had changed the name of the podcast and never explained anything to her at the time of this video. Now, I personally don't have a dog in the race, but from the outside looking in, to me, it's pretty questionable on Mel's part because she's dealing with people new to media content and the whole podcast game. Mel essentially started a business from a discussion she had with her friends, and because she has access to capital and has an experienced team in the business of media, ran with the idea, and it looks like she wanted to include her friends as tag-alongs for the ride and build the business relying on their novice understanding of how business works in the media game. To have them as some type of interns on the show that she herself fully owns, and after the business starts making money, she would start paying some type of wage to her co-hosts as independent contractors under the business. But if S owns the name Menopod, as she states, then that means more than likely she not only discussed this with her friends, but she had enough due diligence to do the paperwork to own the name. And if this is the case, there should have been some thorough discussion on rights and payment or buy it or something or some type of profit sharing split at some point before you announce the date. The content, was supposed to drop at a certain date, and that had not been done, according to her. Mel knows full well that S is new to the content game, and she's your friend. At least let her know what happened before you decide to pivot and ghost your friends after you worked on the pod together. Again, according to S, that was never done. She is trying to relaunch the podcast herself, though, with her other friend, I guess named the Menopod as well. Melyssa also has gone on to Spaces hosted by Joe the other day, where she was fired up and stated that from now on she's not going to remain silent and that she's going to tackle issues head on and not to be silent when people are slandering her character. And basically, I'm hoping that this next pod that's airing today, hopefully she addressed some of these questions and issues because it's basically sounding like there's shady business practices. I don't know for sure. I just think that Mel tried to kind of take advantage of the situation, and because she didn't want to explain herself, in my opinion, she just said, I'm just leave y'all new niggas to whatever, and I'm gonna do my own thing." But we'll see if she addressed this for this pod today, and also they're probably going to further discuss it next week, maybe even on Monday, which is the Monday pod, which is on Patreon exclusive. Y'all need to sign up to Joe Button's Patreon. I myself am friend of the show, and it's a lot of content on there. Y'all really should show up to the Patreon and support the machine because it's really good content. They really have really good content throughout. You know, they have content going back to 2021, I believe. But you can do a lot of catch up. You know, I actually came into the Patreon at the beginning of 2023 when Mel and Flip joined. But overall, Mel's kind of dealing with a semi-pod related issue for the first time. When it comes to her producing her own show, she's kind of going through her own drama, and it's kind of good to see her and her growth on the pod, and that she's actually taking the initiative to actually start her own pod. I just think that she may have gone about some of the details in a sketchy way, but hopefully everything works out for her and the peoples. Salute.
You keep talking, man, and you shut the fuck up. Huh?